Good evening, everyone. And welcome to ICALA. My name is Alberto Keosian, and I am the Learning and Engagement Coordinator here at the museum. We're so glad you can join us for tonight's POV Tour, organized on the occasion of Jackie Castillo, Through the Descent, Like the Return. POV Tours is a program series where different voices are invited to guide us through projects currently on view, offering their own unique perspective on the work and ultimately opening up a space for dialogue. This evening, we're honored to be joined by American historian William Deverell. William is a leading scholar of the cultural and environmental history of Los Angeles, and tonight he'll be sharing his lens on Jackie's installation, helping us connect the art to the histories and narratives that shape Los Angeles. As with all POV tours, tonight's walkthrough invites you to not only listen, but also to participate in conversations and share your own reflections towards the end of the program. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to note that this is the final exhibition program for this cycle. Your presence and support throughout these programs continue to be a key factor in fueling our commitment to producing meaningful programming here at ICALA. Thank you for your heavy hand in all of that. And while this is the last program tied directly to our current exhibitions, we still have 2 more events before we officially close out this cycle. This Friday, August 22nd, please join us for Cocktails and Cumbia, a lively evening of art, music, and community. Galleries will be open late, and ICALA members enjoy free drinks all night. If you're not yet an ICALA member, please find a moment to chat with our team at the front desk, who can share all about our membership program and get you involved. And on Wednesday, August 27th, we'll be hosting our second Wear Your Rights silkscreen workshop, where you can print your constitutional rights in English, Spanish, or both, onto a t-shirt or tote bag you bring from your own closet. We hope you'll join us for one or both of these programs as we close out the season. And with that, please join me in welcoming William Deverell.
Thank you, Alberto. It's nice to be among new and old friends. I'm really thrilled by the invitation to be here. It's not often that a scholar, a kind of pointy-headed scholar from a history department, gets asked to do a walkthrough through a modern art exhibit, and it's thrilling for me to be here. I've enjoyed my time with Alberto a great deal, learning his backstory, which is fascinating to me. And as I say, it's really a privilege to be here. So I write books, and writing a book, a history book, as my friend MG in the audience knows well, is like planting a seed and finding the right soil and doing the nurturing and talking to it a lot. And if you're lucky, with the right combination of your input and environmental inputs, that seed grows into, let's say, a tree. But then the book itself is like a leaf. You know, we call books have leaves for a reason. And taking the leaf of a book, a product that you've had a lot to do with and you've had an intimate relationship with for often years and years, then what we do is the leaf goes away. You know, let's just continue the metaphor. You put it in a stream and it washes downstream. And where it goes, you have no clue. You just hope it goes in places where people will appreciate it. And that's the mystery and beauty of writing books. You have an intimate relationship with them, you sweat, fret over them, you work hard, you seek input from trusted advisors and experts. But then the product outlives you, and that's magical. So you want to do it just right at the time you get it done. It's only a moment in time of your knowledge. Hopefully your knowledge continues beyond the publication of a book. But then what the book does and who it speaks to is a mystery. So when Alberto contacted me and said, this very talented artist had noted your work as part of her inspiration, it's thrilling. It's thrilling. I can make my students read my books because I'm going to test them on them. But people I've never met in careers and disciplines and creative projects and creative lives that are not the same as my own, who find inspiration in my work, you can't beat that. That's wonderful. So to be here and to talk about that exhibit through, and I don't know the artist, I look forward to meeting her, but to talk through my sensibilities of my scholarly work in real-time visual presentation of ideas and historic references, there's, again, a kind of magic in that the disciplines do speak to each other. So the moment in time of producing a book, which is now 21 years old, to have it have this, I don't know if I should say new life, but to have it have this resonance and reverberation in the work of an artist, that's a real honor. So I'm an American historian. I did most of my work in college in American literature and the 19th and 20th centuries, utterly captivated by American writing. And when I was finishing up college, I wanted to be a high school teacher in my home state of Colorado and coach sports. That was my dream. Still kind of have it. Maybe a retirement pursuit. But to do that, I realized that graduate education was probably the right thing to do. So I went to my mentors in American literature and American studies, where I was in college, and said, I want to go to graduate school. And they said, in what? And I said, English, American literature, American letters, American writers. And they said, it's not such a good idea. And I was a college junior, maybe? What did I know? And I said, why? I really want to do that. And I've enjoyed all my classes with you and you and you, and I want to be like you. And they said, it's just a terrible time to go to graduate school in American literature. The job market is frozen. The job market has never thawed since I approached graduate school myself. I said, okay, what would you advise me to do? Should I go to graduate school in history? Because I loved history. And they said, it's marginally better. So I did. I trundled off to graduate school in history. I had a brilliant time, exciting, exhilarating time, intellectually stimulating as all get out to get a Ph.D. in American history from brilliant instructors. And then in that period, I realized that my training was taking me to collegiate education, and that made sense. I was being trained as a college professor and a scholar to produce scholarly works. So I've done that my whole career, and I've been so lucky to study the American West in the American West at Western American institutions. I did my graduate school back east at Princeton. Fascinating. Little archways for little 18th century men. And I felt constrained by the lack of vista and Western spaces, but the intellectual hothouse nature of my graduate program was thrilling. And my classmates and my professors were brilliant. But I hightailed it back to the American West. And I've been lucky in my career. I've taught it at the University of California system, at Caltech, and now at USC. And that's a real privilege to do my work in the landscapes that I'm interested in. To make a long story short, I produced scholarly works and moved through the ranks of my career. But when I got to mid-career stage, I tackled the project that speaks to this exhibit, I guess, from Jackie's perspective. When I was in college, my primary mentor was one of the deans of Mexican-American history, Albert Camarillo at Stanford. Remarkable human being, went to UCLA in the 60s when there were 40 Chicano kids at UCLA. He's from Compton. And just by ferocious willpower and intellect, he marched his way through a PhD to tenure and full professorship at Stanford. He took me under his wing and taught me Western America, California, and Chicano and Mexican-American histories, which really resonated with me. That immigrant story and the rise of a Mexican cultural muscle and voting bloc and powerful intellectual figures and struggle and the Mexican civil rights movement, all very important to me as a student. When I started thinking about what I was going to work on as hopefully a major book mid-career, I had also by then fallen under the spell of a friend, but also a mentor, Mike Davis, whom Jackie has recommended over there as one of the books to accompany her own thought processes. Mike was a force of nature. Mike was an exasperating, brilliant, incredibly loyal, thoughtful, creative man, and we were friends. And his death a couple years ago was a real loss. Mike had energized, single-handedly, really, the study of LA through his books, City of Courts, and then Ecology of Fear, which followed afterwards. He made it a topic of international legitimacy across a dozen fields: ethnic studies, urban studies, architecture, English, history, American studies, Mexican-American work, etc. So Mike had energized this geography as ripe for scholarly work. And Mike was a polarizing figure, which for scholarship is great, because people rise up and say, you don't know what you're talking about. Other people say, yes, he does. It generates heat and light. It's a powerful wake upon which the rest of us surfed. So one fascination had been planted in college with Mexican-American work. One had been nurtured in my mid-career studying and trying to grapple with the history of Southern California. And I had realized, right or wrong, that no one seemed to have put those two together. In other words, the rise of modern Los Angeles from the end of the Mexican-American War in 1848 unto now is an urban success story. It's a remarkable trajectory. It's a juggernaut of urban history to go from a small indigenous landscape to a Spanish outpost of the Spanish ecclesiastical empire, to an outpost of the Mexican Republic, to an outpost of the American Republic, to the global metropolis, to hosting the Olympics in 1932 out of nowhere, to rise up into the post-World War II Cold War economies that made Los Angeles expand exponentially, greater Los Angeles. So it's that story, but it's also a story of Mexican America, Mexico and Mexican America. And I wanted to put those two together. How do they relate to one another? So I wrote this book. It took 10 years. There's all kinds of life interludes in there, et cetera. Mid-career academics struggle to find time because mid-career people all over in any discipline probably struggle to find time because your life has gotten much more complicated. Your work responsibilities are more. Your family responsibilities are more. Graduate school is, as hard as it is, it's a delight because you have one thing to do, which is your work, and impress your professors and learn from them. So the book took a long time, but when it was published, it's called Whitewashed Adobe: The Rise of Los Angeles and the Remaking of Its Mexican Past, 1850 to 1940. In that book, I took a set of thematic chapters about Los Angeles history, largely linear, mid-19th century forward to the first half of the 20th century, but thematically organized around various concepts or themes: labor, politics, culture, environment, etc. And looked at the entanglement of Anglo-America and Mexico, Mexicans, and Mexican Americans, and how that stew really was generative and productive about the rise of modern Los Angeles, warts and all. It's not an especially pretty story. It's a story of violence, racial desegregation, racism, etc. And that's just abundantly clear from the historic record. And we're just seeing the latter-day versions of that now. Historians are very quick to say, what's happening now in the streets of Los Angeles has a long tail, and it does. The part of the book that resonated, I think, with Jackie and I look forward to talking to her about it, is the intertwined nature of the built landscape. What is built here? By whom? And what are the remnant artifacts of that history? This notion that Los Angeles is a city without history is ridiculous. It's just an easy, facile thing to say, and usually it's said by people who don't live here. Our historical complexity is as deep as any human community in any moment, in any time on the globe. If you have humans involved, you have history. Of course, you have natural history without us, but the history of this place is endlessly complicated and intricate, and the signs of it are all around us still. Yes, we've bulldozed things. Yes, we've taken things down. Far too many, from my point of view, than we should have. But you all here know we could leave this building, walk around, and encounter late 19th and early 20th century LA pretty quickly. That's a story woven into the labor landscapes and perspectives of the American Southwest as a place that once was, and if we're back to the late 19th century, once was recently Mexico. So the palimpsests, the ghosts, the echoes, the shadows, it's all there. And you've got to dig into the historic record, which historians are pretty good at, following their nose, following their trail, finding the documents, memories, stories, images, ephemera, and starting to piece together as best we can the fragile necklace of sources that then we try to interpret to the best of our ability to get not the truth, but our version of it. So what I was going to say about the resonance with Jackie, I think, having been through that exhibit, is a sort of embodiment of the historical trajectories through the built landscape. What was built and who did it? Los Angeles rises, greater Los Angeles, it's really the county, but greater Los Angeles, Southern California rises through the coincident timing of a couple of events, like any big place in the world. There's coincidences that happen. For Southern California, one was, and we're seeing that now, Southern California comes of age in American statehood, 1850. We're 175 years old right now as a state. Statehood through well after the Second World War, 1970, 1980. Unusually wet. Precipitation, unusually wet. The availability of just below the surface of the earth aquifers. There was a lot of water here. So the agricultural fecundity of Southern California, the valley, the San Gabriel Valley was one of the wealthiest agricultural geographies in the world in the 1880s. That timing of meteorological grace helped to create agricultural industrial production, helped to put people to work, helped to create, if not fortunes, some fortunes, but also that kind of vision of an orange grove in everyone's yard. And that's a luck of timing. That's going away through climate change. The other coincident timing of critical nature here in that growth period, which we can date from 1875 to 2008, something like that, is the arrival of the 1910 Mexican Revolution. That upheaval in Mexico sent thousands upon thousands of refugees from violence across the border. And also, the timing was such that industrializing LA, all around here, all around this district, is reaching into Mexico to grab labor through advertisements, subvented railroad travel, labor agents, etc. Many will go to the Imperial Valley to grow cotton. Many will go to the San Joaquin Valley and the San Fernando Valley, but many will come here as laborers. And they're segmented into particular levels of work. There's a ceiling. They're segmented into difficult blue-collar labor. and they're segregated by districts generally, or the districts down by the LA River tended to be fairly polyglot because working class neighborhoods are never as segregated as wealthier neighborhoods. It's the upper middle class to middle class neighborhoods start to draw the racial lines pretty starkly. Working class neighborhoods, not so much. But that coincident timing of the revolution and the magnetic draw of labor needs here created a new century for Los Angeles and its growth. Modern Los Angeles is built, literally built, by not just Mexican labor, but a lot of Mexican labor. They're doing the track work, they're doing the road work, and as Jackie points out, they're doing the work up. Los Angeles begins in the early 20th century through the creation of the elevator and girdered steel to rise. You can't do that without strong steel, and you're not going to build a 12-story building without an elevator. Once you've got that, then you need the labor to put all that together. You need the capital, but you need the labor to put all that together. So one of the chapters in my book, which this really speaks to me, this exhibit, is about brick. We don't see, you around here, you see brick. There's brick on this wall I'm looking at. There's brick down here. But if you see a brick building, except for USC's faux brick landscape of collegiate Gothic or whatever they call it, except for that, if you see brick around here, it's old. It's old. You can date the building. You can probably get it within 10 years. 1933 Long Beach earthquake rips the heart out of the brick business because the brick buildings fall down. Prior to 1933, there's a lot of brick being built. The world's largest brickyard is in Montebello. And it has satellite brickyards in Santa Monica, Pasadena, elsewhere, because the clay is there and the labor's there. The brickwork is, I'm going to say it's 99.9% Mexican labor. Oftentimes, there's a white hierarchy in the front office, of course, but there might be a white hierarchy in the management out in the brickyards themselves, but largely Mexican workers. So I wrote a whole chapter called The Color of Brick is Brown. And it was about that world's largest brickyard and what that community was and how those workers got there and building up the architectural structures of Southern California. And what's fascinating about it's much the same with red tile roofs, which speaks to Jackie's installation. What was once seen as a utilitarian construction material, brick. If brick doesn't fall down, it's pretty good. It holds a building together unless there's a big earthquake. That brickyard in Montebello was pumping out hundreds of thousands of bricks a month. And that company was called Simons by the founder's name, S-I-M-O-N-S. Every fourth or so brick that came out of that yard was embossed with that name. That utilitarian brick, which was seen as the antidote to adobe. Adobe was old construction material. Adobe was Catholic. Adobe was Mexican or Spanish. Modern Los Angeles wanted to move beyond that deliberately. We are now a civilized place that no longer has those old world building materials. Well, what's happened is, as the brick was being utilized more and more and more, adobe started to become nostalgic. It was originally like, let's knock them all down. So we lost most of our adobes. They just knocked them down. So people started to look at the adobe as the nostalgic reminiscence of what once was. It's part of the kind of sheen we have about our history. And now that we don't make a lot of brick, the Simons brick with that stamp in it has become, architecturally or landscape architecturally significant. People look for those. They put them on their walkways. They put them. They make decorative fountains out of them. They've become nostalgically interesting. The same is true in Jackie's, and Jackie knows it better than I do. The same is true of red tile roofs. So red tile roofing, which has now become this kind of red tile pornography of it's everywhere and it's devoid of any kind of particular soul. Red tile roofing has become a symbol of the appropriation of a certain kind of past, so that when I drive home tonight, I'll go through that by that remarkably interesting Shell gas station on Hill that's got Chinese flourishes, because it's in Chinatown, with red tile roof. It's like, whoa, that's a hodgepodge. So red tile roofing became, for Anglo-LA, 19-teens, 1920s, 1930s, a certain kind of statement about we are of this place, while at the same time, the barriers to racial progress were instituted and put down hard against people of non-white categories. So that's fascinating to me. And what I think the artist is doing is she's commenting on that past. She's commenting on the pain she felt to see those red tiles being destroyed in the onslaught of a building project that rendered them obsolete. She's also reflecting on her own father's personal history of labor, and she's done it deliberately, I think, lifting it up in there so that we don't forget the verticality that was allowed or supported by all this labor that came here and began to lift Los Angeles up to the sky. When our house, I live in a 1923 Spanish-style house. It's quintessential, archways. It's a beautiful home. We have California drought-tolerant plants and succulents, and we take it very seriously. When we purchased our house, it was beat up and almost uninhabitable, but we loved it. So we did a project to fix it up. We didn't add anything to the footprint. We just carefully sculpted the inside to work. And one of the projects was to take the red tiles, and resort them on top of the roof to distribute the color palette. Because for whatever reason, maybe it had been done in the recent past, the darker ones were all over here, the lighter ones were all over there. And they cover red tiles from the 1920s by this very famous tile company called Gladding McBean. And there are nuts out here for Gladding McBean. You meet Gladding McBean fans, they love it. And they would be captivated by the materiality of that exhibit. The Gladding McBean tiles cover a color palette that is astonishingly broad, from sort of a light pink to a deep eggplanty color. So we had the roofing company come, and we said, we want to redistribute the tiles. And they understood that. So they stacked them all up. They're very heavy. So this is really interesting just in terms of walking underneath those. Mind your head. They're not going to fall. I saw they're really done well. But those are heavy objects of growth and materiality. The roofing company stacked them all up and then began to redistribute them. We trusted the foreman. The foreman was this 80-year-old Latino guy that I got to know, named Danny. And he worked up there without a shirt on. He was ripped because he's throwing heavy Gladding McBean tiles around for 75 years or 70 years. Very friendly guy. And one day he's up there on the roof and he shouted down to me. He said, "Hey, Bill, when was this house built?" And I said, 1923. And he started laughing. He said, I might have been the guy that put him up here the first time. And now I'm back. And his math was, he was joking, but almost. And they distributed them in this beautiful palette across the roof line, which deliberately my wife and I took a helicopter ride right over it. And it's stunning. No one will see it, but it's stunning and it makes a difference to us. So just that kind of remember what's up there and what it took to do it and who did it and how that's woven into the cultural history of LA that is at once kind of respectful to the past and the non-white past, kind of, but at the same time, precisely in 1923 when my house was being built, really quick to redline neighborhoods, really quick to say, down by the rivers where those people live, down by the rivers where Chinatown is, the Furlong Track in South Central. That's where the African Americans live. Pasadena, okay. Northwest Pasadena, that's the neighborhood where Jackie Robinson will grow up. But where we are, no. But we'll borrow these cultural motifs. They're beautiful. But it's never a story of equity and equality. It's borrowing. And if the borrowing gets ugly, it's violence and discrimination, incarceration, etc. So to have an artist take seriously her own family's labor history and ethnic identity by using red tile roofs, roofing material, accompanied by her photographs, and a very moving little treatise that she's written about why her seeing these tiles being destroyed hit her as a person, as a daughter, and as an artist. It's very powerful. So I loved being in there. I'm happy to walk through there with you now. That's the extent of the kind of prelude. That's my hope as to why she was attracted to scholarly work. And to see that become that is really great. So why don't we go in there, and you're welcome to ask me anything you want, and I'll do my best to answer. And if I don't know the answer, I'll look it up and write you back. Yeah, these are, they're meant to last. It's interesting because so much of the past is ephemeral, and what we have to put together our histories is so fleeting and fragile. I mean, if you think about what the oldest thing in the house or apartment you're in right now, what's the oldest thing? It's probably not that old.
I have a question. You think the current popularity is not just...
Oh, yes, because we're recording for posterity.
I have a question, Professor Deverell. What I'm wondering is, do you think the current popularity of these tiles may have as much to do with fire safety as nostalgia?
That is a fascinating question. Yes and no. So one of the challenges of a red tile roof, it's expensive. And if you want the old ones, that's almost impossible to roof an entire house with the old ones. But the curvature creates all kinds of tunnels for sparks to get in. So when we have the Altadena fire, the fires burn from the outside in because they're all ember driven. They burn from the inside out because they're driven by that blizzard of embers, unless a fiery tree falls on your house. But most of it's the ember driven ignition.
I thought that was interesting in what you shared in the lobby about this idea of this vision of rising, like a city rising, this history of the elevator. I didn't really think about that. But what's interesting is in conceiving of this installation for ICA, Jackie talks about this idea of a kind of, it's both this, the shingles themselves are both kind of falling, being thrown off the roof, but they're also rising. There's the violence of the fall, and then there's the hope of the ascendance. And I think that's just really interesting of the rising of a city and this vision of, this vision in immigrant stories, families of ascendance, of how that both relates but also conflates and contradicts each other.
Yeah, I think you're right. I hadn't thought of it quite that way, but I think you're absolutely right. And just seeing you ask the question, there's the shadows of the past right behind you. So the shadows are still with us, and they are obviously both rising and falling, given the plane they're on. So yeah, I think that's true.
These two photographs, one on the left, this kind of clandestine red photo of a facade, is from the same, Jackie's neighborhood in Mid-Wilshire, where she witnessed back in 2017 this kind of re-roofing happening. And that's coupled across the room with this photograph, which is actually from her grandfather's home in Guadalajara in Mexico. And it's these kind of rebar castillos in his yard. And her father, Jackie's father, who helped tremendously engineering this installation so that it was both her father and then Jackie's sister was also a help in terms of figuring out how to make this work. But her father participated in the installation of this and was a kind of key collaborator. And we asked him, I was like, do you have a background in engineering and in construction? And absolutely not. What he knows is from, his own father and the kind of relationship to rebar and to materials from Guadalajara. And so she wanted to have that represented. So it's just interesting that.
Yeah, the family stuff is really powerful to me, in part because of that story I reflected upon about my undergraduate mentor, Al Camarillo. His father immigrated as a little boy and never finished third grade and was a construction worker. He was a bricklayer here in South LA. And then his son becomes this major figure at Stanford. So the family connections, Camarillo, if he walked in here, he would find this incredibly moving because he would get all the references. He would get all the references, and then he'd read that and see the familial ties that she's speaking to. So, it's the human drama. It's love and loss. It's all right here. So, I hadn't realized she's flipped these ones upside down. I'd like to ask her why that is. So these are very different. This one's very different.
It was a matter of, trying to get this effect of in here there's this really clear kind of relationship to descending, and this flip is kind of, again, this other relationship to ascendance of this, you're kind of not sure when you're sitting in here of am I witnessing something fall, rise? And it was cool because I think, she had this video of this scene back in 2017, and when we invited Jackie to do this show and this project, she went back to this video and this footage and was taking stills of the video to then get these kind of 4 constellations of shingles. And what's special is kind of what you shared of you look here and how you relate to it. I think what's so special about Jackie's work and having it in a museum context like this is the conversations that is brought up around how does everyone relate to these materials, because it's different, or relate to that sense of home.
Yep. Yeah, and I really do think the shadows are part of the show.
Yeah, she was really specific about the lighting, so it's good that stands out to you.
Yeah. Pete.
Hey, Bill. So I was to just kind of piggyback on what Amanda said regarding the kind of the reference that you made to the ascension of the architectural of the tiles, and then that they're kind of in a descent. They're both descending and they're rising. As a historian, you have a very unique perspective on this, and I kind of wanted to get to that because the mythologizing of Los Angeles is really one that has been key to building the city, right? So this mythologizing, Carrie McWilliams talks a lot about it in Island on the Land, and that was one of the very first books written about LA history. And then you're referencing it in a very unique way where I think we can talk about the mythos and the reality, and we see that in places like Olvera Street, for example, where the architecture itself is true, but the mythos around it is false. But the thing that is true, and I think that what we see here in Jackie Castillo's work that actually you can't dispute is the fact of Mexican labor in Los Angeles.
Correct.
And so despite the mythos, despite the appropriation and everything else, the labor itself is very real.
Yeah.
And so could you talk about how labor has actually been key to kind of exposing that myth and kind of breaking it open so that people understand the city or not?
So I all of that was very well put, Pete, and I agree with you about all of it. And God bless the work of Carrie McWilliams, who was the pioneer of pioneers in taking the city seriously. I think exposing, so the mythos, there's a whole set of them, obviously. This is where you come to get young and beautiful. This is the second version of the California dream. The first version is you go to the gold rush and get rich. In the early 20th century, you come here to get famous. And the modern, I mean, MG knows more about this than I do, the sort of modern invention of glamour here is through the film industry and it's all of its apparatus. So that's part of the myth. The other part of the myth is this is where you can come and heal. You can cure tuberculosis if you just sit outside long enough. That's a myth. You need antibiotics. But Southern California draws people here for the sunshine and the healing and convalescent powers of landscape. That's another coincidence, which is this emerges after the rupture and horror of the Civil War. So many of the wounded, psychically or physically, come here because this is saying to them, you'll heal here. Some do, most don't. And then the other mythos that's so promulgated by the press and art, etc., is that the landscape, the sunshine and the soil is so perfect that it doesn't need labor. So oftentimes the postcards are depicting this incredibly beautiful field of poppies or sculpted flowers, etc., and there's not a laborer in sight. Well, the laborers are all over the place. They're just not in the picture frame. So repopulating the landscape with the laborers has been a project of scholars and policymakers and activists and teachers and family members for more than a century. To just say, wait a minute, there really were laborers here who labored hard and long under not the best circumstances. The brickyard workers, let's say these things came from, these beautiful tiles came from the brickyard that I know about. That job was backbreakingly hard, hot, and they weren't particularly well paid. They were skilled. To say they're unskilled labor is wrong. They knew how to make bricks and form them and dry them and cook them and stack them and deliver them and then put them to work. But in the context of Mexican labor in 1920s LA, that's a good job. And so the people that are the descendants of those workers have this vision of grandma and grandpa growing up in the brickyard in 1935 during the Depression or 1940 or 1928, and that was a good job. And I'm not here to say they're wrong. I'm not going to go against that. But the context is important, that that was the best job they were going to get if they were going to get a good job. They're not going to bust through that ceiling. So the mythos is, I think the first way to break it is actually to repopulate the landscape with the people that did these, that made this stuff. And that there's generations of scholars and activists and others who did that. The Mexican civil rights movement is in large part about that. Like, I want to grow up in a world that's not like that my grandparents lived in here in LA. I want to be freer. I want to have more civil rights than they had. So it's an ongoing project, and the reason McWilliams is so important, many reasons. He was brilliant. Carrie McWilliams' Southern California Country book was written published in 1946. That is 80 years ago, and we still go to it because he was so clear-eyed about what was happening. The 20th century isn't even halfway over. And between McWilliams at one end of the pole and Mike Davis at the other, you could do worse than read those two guys. And there's many, 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 many others now because of their example. But those are powerful, powerful projects.
Breaking open of the myth, too, of like what you're talking about, Pete. You just described like some of the myths of Los Angeles. And when we think also of like breaking open, let's say the myths or the stereotypes of immigrants in our city. And I think that's what, when I experience Jackie's work, it's this kind of like opening up, not just about like the story of this city, but of what an immigrant story is. And so much of, I think of like the narratives that are circulating in the political arena right now, and especially in our city in this moment, is kind of like the immigrant as the one who steals. And
Right.
instead, within Jackie's work, and these aren't my words, this is an artist who I just met with earlier this week who's doing our next mural project, talks about, no, the immigrant, the breaking of that myth is in showing like the immigrant labor is that which builds, that which nourishes and feeds us, that which cultivates community. And so I think that that to me is like a conflation that happens within Jackie Castillo's installation, is that it's both the myth of LA and the myth of the immigrant experience in LA.
And I think, I agree, Amanda, and I think if she were here and we were to ask her, I think she would agree that part of the momentum here is we've been here a long time. The modern city rose here in large part because of our labor, and we made these things. These are made by Mexican workers. I'm very firm in believing that that's entirely true. I don't know how old these are. I don't think they're 1920s. I think they're more recent. But yeah. But we could find out. This is find outable if you went to the address where she got them.
Is that on?
Yeah.
I was really interested in what you said about the weight of each of these tiles. And I find that really interesting because when I first stepped into this piece, I was just completely struck by the labor that went into creating this sort of tentative balance in between each of these tiles. And it feels like almost that it's about to fall off, but it's obviously very beautiful and intentionally caught in midair. And this is really just a comment, but I think another binary that I'm wondering if you also feel is between the very visible labor in balancing these tiles, of you see that each of these, I guess, mechanisms are individually put, but also that there has been such tension and intention in creating this very purposeful cut on the ground for that tile over there, and it being entirely disguised of the rebar that's emerging, if that's making sense.
It does make sense to me. And I think when I first came in here, I came over here to these. These, Amanda will know better than I, but these are both homage to her family and rebar knowledge. But this is not a trivial installation. These are to hold these things up. And they are heavy. And they've done it so gracefully because they do seem to kind of float, but they're not floating. I mean, they appear to be. But these, how far into the ground do those go? I'm amazed. I would have thought they'd need more. But they're not going anywhere. It is. It is very. It is. If you look at it, it's very elegant. They've been spaced so beautifully, and I can imagine drilling them is not easy to do either. So it is very elegant, and maybe this is some commentary about the weight of history. I don't know. There's a lot going on here.
What I found kind of disconcerting and is I usually associate rebar with structure that is plunged into the ground, and the inversions to me are so exciting. This is not as this speaks to the line of a roof, even though there's an inversion. But I think that's the radical step. They almost look like cradles.
Yeah.
And the radical inversion, I think, forces you to look differently at the other work. There's something really disturbing about hanging rebar, it just upsets my OCD.
Yeah. But
making visible that which is normally very invisible.
exactly. They look like objects that could cradle something, you know,
Yeah.
ascendant, cradling, you know,
But I'm
it
curious.
like puts it because this one, again, this one recalls the slope of a roof, so it's
does.
not as disconcerting and
Yeah.
not as much of an invitation to rethink,
Yeah.
I think.
But again, I agree. I think that is interesting, MG, and the engineering expertise here to hold them up, that's real. Yeah, amazing, amazing. And these, to me, when I first came in, this looks like birds in flight to me. They're going. I feel like that one's going that way.
What was interesting is we were talking about like the art historian nerd in me when we were at Jackie's studio and like talking about the materials, and she had a number of like studies in her studio at USC. And we were talking about, you know, when we think of modernity and of this kind of moment in history, the early 1900s, one of the references that came up was Duchamp's New Descending the Staircase, which was, referred to as this by critics as an explosion in the shingle factory, because of that relationship to form. And so it's really interesting to me, another program that Jackie did, kind of like, but that, yeah. So I think that like even, I don't know, it's fun, I think, to approach the show from material history, from an infrastructural history, and even in an art history of like what it's offering and teaching us of.
Yeah. And no, I think that's really fascinating, and I can see it. But also, I hadn't thought about it this way either. The artisanship of the tiles, speaking to an ancient past here in Southern California, versus the precision of the metal rebar. You know, they are in tension with one another.
I was going, oh, it's like the biscuit company with the girded steel, but the brick, which is not.
Yeah, there's a lot.
But it is like the biscuit company around the corner with the girded steel and the brick.
Yeah.
Pete, do you have another question, or you?
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, buddy.